by the way? Yeah. Good. Interjected, why is this not discussed by the neoclassical? Why don't they have it? Well, this is Krugman talking about me. I had a lot of fun talking about him too. In a paper called Minsky and Methodology Wonkish, he said that I go to assert that lending is an addition to aggregate demand. And he says, I don't get that at all. He said, if I decide to cut back on my spending and stash the funds in a bank, which lends them out to someone else, this doesn't have to represent a net increase in demand. Now that's blatantly what Richard is saying, what they believe. We don't have to allege anymore. We can quote Krugman. I think I'll send him a Christmas present. And he called what Richard and I do and Anne and co banking mysticism. He says where the left and the right meet. Austrians at the right-hand extreme and Minskyites like myself and my colleagues here somehow believe that banks are outside the rule, they've got unique powers for good and evil, and he says, but that's not true. He says banks don't create demand out of thin air, they are just one channel linking lenders to borrowers, and therefore, since they see them as just intermediaries, they think it can abstract from them and model the macroeconomy. Now, the ironic thing I've learned about neoclassical economists is that they don't actually know their own literature, and I'll show you that in a moment, but this is the vision they have. Patient lends to impatient, the bank just sits in the middle, patient spending goes down, impatience rises, no change in aggregate demand, you can ignore debt and you can ignore banks. That's the logic, the a priori, sitting in the armchair, Jeremy Bentham style logic that means they don't actually think about it. The real world is like this. An entrepreneur or a speculator approaches a bank and says, I've got a great idea, and the bank says, yep, that's a great idea, we reckon, here's $1 million, by the way, you owe us $1 million. It's a simultaneous creation of both the loan and the deposit. So it grants a loan and it creates a deposit at the same time. And this was something which seriously well-informed, practical people in the banking sector tried to tell economists back in the days of monetarism, to say it wouldn't work. Alan Holmes, who was senior vice president of the New York Fed, fought a rearguard action trying to stop monetarism. And he put it beautifully succinctly, in the real world, banks extend credit, creating deposits in the process, and look for the reserves later. The idea you can control them by controlling the reserves was completely, pardon the Australian French, arse about tit. So the new loan puts additional spending power into circulation, and therefore aggregate demand exceeds the demand from income alone. So they're wrong to ignore the role of the change of debt in macroeconomic analysis. And ironically, the most important revelation I had in writing the second edition of Debunking Economics was that neoclassical economists don't understand neoclassical economics. Okay? They don't read their own literature, they don't realise the limitation that literature puts upon their own modelling. So I love the fact these two guys, Kydland and Prescott, got the Nobel Prize for inventing real business cycle theory, which is the travesty that's led to the total failure of neoclassical economics to see this crisis coming. But they did some fantastic empirical work in 1989-90. And looking at a whole range of variables, they concluded, amongst many other non-neoclassical conclusions, which they admitted in the paper contradicted standard theory. Literally wrote that. They said there's no evidence that the monetary base leads the cycle, which is necessary for the theory of money multiplier as to how the whole process occurs. If the money multiplier is correct, then M0, base money, has to change first, and later credit money moves down the stream. Instead, they found that the credit money led base money. Led the cycle by 3/4 and base money by another quarter again. So that contradicts the money multiplier model that they happily use to dismiss the importance of money in banks. Fama and French, who were the street warriors for pushing the efficient markets hypothesis down people's throats, they did great empirical work back in 1999 it was, and they looked at what actually causes changes in investment at the aggregate level by corporations with a huge database. And they said that the source of financing most correlated with investment is long-term debt. It's at the aggregate level, adding up all American corporations, huge database they had. They said debt plays a key role in accommodating year-by-year variation in investment. So the source of investment funding is the change in debt. And that's why it's so important in aggregate demand. So debt and endogenous money matter incredibly in macroeconomics, and they're completely left out on a priori, non-empirical reasons by neoclassical economists. And as Richard points out, very importantly as well, it can be the source of good stuff, which is investment, the source of bad stuff, which is speculation. And of course, banks have gone for speculation. So the neoclassicals, they're useless.